when I was an undergraduate at Douglas College, I spent my junior year abroad in Jerusalem at Hebrew University, and it was very hard to get to a piano, and I studied other things that I was interested in at the time. And when I came back, I was not at all interested in doing a senior piano recital, which would have been the norm, and I asked to do a composition recital, and was told that if I found the performers, wrote the music, organized it all, they would let me do it. So I did, and that was what really started me off on the path into composition. I had composed some as I was growing up, but it was really not until I was well into my undergraduate career that I became really fascinated by it. So when I started the Virginia Center for Computer Music in the late 80s, there wasn't anyone there who said, you should do it this way, you should do it that way. And actually, I had been very intrigued by the idea of computer music while I was a graduate student, but it was in the dark ages where you had to type out your note cards, and it was mainframe computing, and you get to use the digital analog converter in the middle of the night at the engineering school, and if you had made one typo in your cards, it would just, your job would blow up. It was not very conducive. So when I had the opportunity to start the VCCM, I went to a couple of stores in New York. MIDI had just come out, and I sort of camped out and learned enough about it to write a grant application that got funded, and started it with a couple of Mac SEs and a Mac 2. And an Amiga, and it really just sort of developed from that point on. I mean, one of the problems, I think, is that the technology keeps changing. So my first piece in this medium was a piece called Hearing Things for amplified violin, MIDI keyboard controller, and then a bunch of peripheral devices, a sampler, a voice processor, effects processors, et cetera, and within 2 years all those pieces of equipment were obsolete. So that was a real sort of wake-up call to how do we think about these things, and do we care whether our pieces are ephemeral or not? And I guess for the most part I kind of do, because I spend a lot of time working on them. But it's still an issue. I mean, operating systems change, you create programs that work on one, and they may not work on a later date one. So it's not like writing for a piano that probably is pretty settled at this point.
Co-worker, his great-grandfather, his one of my mom's co-workers, his great-grandfather, 5 times back or 5 generations back, he was an indentured servant that helped build the rotunda. He still has receipts.
In general, the more one knows about music, the richer one's experience is. I get into these arguments all the time. My husband, Michael Kabovi, who's a cognitive psychologist and studies visual and auditory perception and is very perceptive of musical design, but is not well schooled in it. And we frequently get into this discussion about how much do you need to know, how much should you need to know. And my contention is that the more you know, the more you will enjoy it, but it's not essential to your ability to enjoy or empathize with or be moved by music. I mean, I certainly have experienced music, music and performance, East Asian music that I'm not schooled in, but I've been moved by it. So I think it's a very interesting question, and one that also reflects what so many students say about studying music theory. Oh, this is like putting it under a microscope and I'm not going to like it anymore because I'm going to understand too much about it. And I've always thought that the flip side of that is kind of true. It's fascinating to know how people think about music and design it and structure it. So I think the more one knows, the better. But can one respond to music without having a deep theoretical knowledge? I think the answer is yes. Had a number of discussions about, well, why should we bother going into a hall to listen to a piece through loudspeakers? And my answer is twofold. One, the sensation of sound in a large space is radically different. It can envelop you in a completely different way. So that psychologically, I think the impact is quite different. And the other is the sociality of the live experience and that sort of group interaction that happens. So yes, I personally really love the experience of the live. The other thing about the performances that involve live performers, there's theatricality of it, there's delicacy, there's the possibility of failure. It's really a much more vivid kind of experience. And that said, I listen to lots of music that's recorded as well, and I'm happy to have this incredible largesse of recorded music that I would otherwise not experience. So I think, yes, it's fabulous that we have these recordings. But that doesn't take away from what the meaning is of the live performance.